Hey Gators, it's Dr. Jensen and welcome back to class, Module 2. So again, I hope this class is doing a lot for you. I know the soul-searching stuff can be a little bit exhausting and intimidating because we have to admit our very best and very worst selves to ourselves, right? And it's not easy to do that, to hold yourself in scrutiny and reveal some of the things that you might not have really been able to articulate before. So again, I'm glad we started off in Module 1 with personalities because it's going to blend right into some of these next few things we do. So here in Module 2, we're talking about hard and soft skills. We're getting into things like resumes and cover letters, interviewing, negotiating job offers, and so forth. So this is a time where we want to really think about how you present yourself. And again, this class is really bigger than just the quizzes you take and the assignments you submit. This is about you, doing what you need to do for you, doing your preparation so that you can do something necessary for survival, which is work, right? So use this class to your own advantage to do the preparation you know you really need to do, that you've been putting off your entire college career, and we're hoping you could throw together at the end and realize there's a lot more to it than you thought. So let's get started. We're jumping into resumes and cover letters, getting them right. We're going to do a little bit of job search overview stuff to begin with to get us oriented. But before we do that, again, ask yourself this question: why are you in this class today? What is your goal? And let me give you a few examples. Maybe your goal is to fix that terrible resume that you've been using for the last few jobs that you know is pretty awful. It doesn't represent you well. You maybe even have mistakes on it, or you're missing some skills or experiences on it, and you just haven't gotten around to updating it. Resumes almost always need work. It's rare to find an absolutely perfect resume. There are good examples out there, but most people need a little work on their resume. And it's hard to discipline yourself to update it regularly. All of a sudden you go, oh wow, I've actually been in this position for a while, or I got some award and I didn't even put that on my resume yet. Or maybe I got certified in a skill. That's a resume. Or I finished my degree. I didn't even update my resume yet. These are exciting accomplishments that sometimes get forgotten about when you get ready to submit a resume. So I always have a little reminder in my calendar about every 3 to 6 months to go in and update my resume and my documents. Within 3 to 6 months, chances are you've been a part of projects, you've had more experience, more awards, more skills that you might need to update. And if all it is just going in and saying, oh, actually there's nothing to update, I think this is still accurate for now, then that's fine. But chances are another 6 months later, you may have some new things to put on there. So that's a really good recommendation, is to build in reminders to look at that resume pretty regularly. Even if you're currently employed, go in there and discipline yourself to update it. It's really important. Here's another reason you might be in this class today. Maybe you've never written a cover letter in your life, and you're going, I don't know how to write them. I don't know what's supposed to be on them. Or maybe you have written a cover letter and you're wondering if you're doing it right. Does it have all the right things? Or maybe you made mistakes in the previous one and no one ever taught you how to do it or fixed it. So that might be a really good goal to have for class today as well. A final goal might be that you're bound for law school and suddenly you got to write a law school statement. There is no class at UF that teaches you how to do that. You just have to figure it out on your own. Well, maybe there is a class that teaches you how to do it. This class, right? So how do you best represent yourself if you're going for law school or if you're going for graduate school? You got to come up with a personal statement, and you'd be surprised at how much admissions committees pay attention to these things. But it's not hard to, or it's not easy, it's quite difficult, quite hard to really represent yourself well with all the necessary things that the committee's looking for, right? So let's get you some reasonable, realistic skills that are going to meet these goals between statements, cover letters, resumes. There's something in this class for everyone. All right, so let's jump into resumes. What are resumes for anyway? So I tell people, if you don't know the purpose of a resume, you shouldn't even write one. Your first impression is usually your cover letter and resume, okay? So your cover letter is kind of the story of yourself, filling in between the lines, describing the experience, and showcasing your writing skills. The resume is really the representation of your work experiences, your education, your accomplishments, your awards, and essentially you to date, right? There's all kinds of formats of resumes. We'll get into that as well. Most people use the chronological format, right? Kind of bound by time. And that's the one employers are most used to seeing. However, there certainly are others that might be a better fit for you. So keep that in mind. But resumes are essentially a representation of your hard skills. Now, we do not want your final skills assessment by an employer to be evaluated with these two documents, because that would be really limited. It's what you look like on paper, but they've never met you in person, and that's really unfair. Unfortunately, this is the reality for most applicants in a job pool. Most people never get past the resume and cover letter stage. Job pools are increasingly competitive, and we want to make sure that you get to the interview, right? Realize the whole point of a resume is to get to the next level of screening in a job application, which is usually the phone screening, then the interview, and later the offer. So let's just backtrack a little bit and talk about the overall hiring process, which I recognize that some of you may not have really even been through yet, or the jobs you were in didn't do as formal of a process. It was kind of like, do you have a heartbeat? Can you talk to people? Can you count money in a cash drawer? Okay, you're hired, right? So sometimes we have entry-level jobs that are very low skill, or first jobs or part-time jobs that they know you're not going to be there very long. You don't need a lot of training to do, and so it's kind of like a quick meet and greet. Okay, here's a job, show up next time, right? But the professional jobs that you want will more than likely have a formal hiring process that'll look like this. You'll start with a resume and or an application. They may need some further information from you that is not necessarily represented on your resume. The goal of the resume is to get to the phone screening. A phone screening is essentially a little bit of a meet and greet to hear your voice and sometimes even see you. I have done video phone screenings before where they get to kind of do a miniature interview. This is the opportunity for the employer to ask questions. Tell me about yourself. Why did you apply for this job? Can I ask you a question about your resume? And they can also tell you a little bit about the position and hear your responses to it. So it's a way to have a mini exchange between the employer and the interviewee, and also clarify any questions that arise at this point in the process. It is also a scrutiny level. Employers will scrutinize at each level. They are trying to rule out people at each level, right? So if they hear that your vocabulary and syntax is a little bit off, maybe you talk too much, maybe you don't talk enough, maybe you're not very friendly, maybe you're really reserved, you're very limited in the information you provide, or you spill out some goofy story that doesn't represent you very well, those things are going to happen occasionally in a phone screening, and they're going to say, nope, red flag, we don't want to hire this person. We'll get more into this later when we go through the soft skills, when we talk about phone screenings. And then certainly interviews. With interviews, they can be a group of people, they can be one-on-one, they can be several interviews across an organization that all have feedback to provide ultimately the hiring manager. And then finally you get to the offer. But I like using this chart. The point of the resume is to get the phone screening. The point of the phone screening is to get an interview. The point of the interview is to get the offer. So they all drive toward this goal of eventually getting a job. So I tell people, don't get overwhelmed with putting in a resume and thinking way downstream to an offer because you're not there yet. Let the resume get you to the next step, and then you can prepare that next step and confidently move forward. And you should have time in between these steps to regroup and regather and present your best self to the employer. Okay, so I get this question a lot. Should it go on my resume? Not all short-term jobs may be relevant or worth mentioning in your resume. So this is kind of tough because sometimes I have students that are a little bit further along in their career and they've done quite a bit of work and maybe they've had room to have worked for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. And they're coming back and doing a bachelor's degree and they're ready to start a new career. And they are left with a resume full of experience and not sure kind of what should stay and what should go. Okay? If you're pretty far along into your work life, chances are you can start to eliminate some of those earlier jobs that you had when you were a teenager. I tell people, unless you have no work experience whatsoever, you can probably get rid of your newspaper route or that part-time job you had in retail at the mall, right? So there might be other jobs that are more relevant and more important, and those are the ones that you really want to highlight and spend time describing, okay? Now, sometimes people need to show work history so it stays on there. But again, it just matters what kind of position this is and whether they value that experience. So when in doubt, leave it on, but realize leaving it on looks a little bit weird, right? So if you're someone that's, let's say, in their 40s or 50s, and you have job experience on there when you were 16, that looks a little goofy sometimes to an employer. So you may have to go, I don't think they really care that I worked at a Lady Foot Locker as a cashier when I was 16 years old. True story, I did. I sold athletic shoes. It was one of my favorite jobs. But it's not going to matter to an employer what I did when I was 16, okay? And again, if you only worked in a position for a couple of months, you may not have gained enough experience to mention it. Now, I realize summer jobs matter, and sometimes just having any kind of work experience matters, and that's fine. But again, as you get more and more positions under your belt, you can start to kind of weed those out. Depending on the positions and the companies, you might even be able to group positions together. This is especially the case with freelance or temporary work. So maybe you have a section of your resume that says full-time work or part-time work or seasonal work. That might be a way to more obviously categorize the experience and let the employer sort through it more easily. So that's just a suggestion. Let's get into freelance and temp work. I know people are like, I know what this is, but people ask to go over it, so I want to make sure we take the time to do so. So time out. What is freelance work? So freelance is essentially a person who works for themselves rather than for a company. While freelancers do take on contract work for companies and organizations, they are ultimately self-employed. They are responsible for all sorts of things that traditional employees are not, such as setting their work hours, keeping track of their time spent on different projects, billing their clients for their efforts, and paying their own employment and business taxes. Yes, you might have to pay payroll taxes on yourself, right? Required by law. Freelancers are not considered employees. They can be counted as workers in certain circumstances, but they're generally not considered employees of the company. They're rather contractors. They're separate. They may or may not receive benefits from that employer, right? They may just receive straight pay or a stipend or some kind of compensation that's different than weekly payroll, okay? So I mentioned freelance work because this might be a gateway into a more permanent position. So this is sometimes a way to get into a company is you're willing to do some work part-time or on the side as your own employee. So these are different ways to describe freelance work, and some of you may participate in this already. So you can call it contract work or a contract job, essentially a job where you're a temporary contract worker rather than a permanent employee. An independent contractor, your work terms are specified by a contract with another company or individual. This is how the IRS classifies this type of work. And this can be anything from being a babysitter, someone that builds houses, to someone that's a consultant. They're all independent contractors. We also use the acronym 1099. 1099 is used to describe the type of job. For example, this is a 1099 contract position, and this refers to the IRS. And the form that you would fill out is a 1099 MISC to document that labor and that pay when you go to file your taxes. So you're going to hear 1099 a lot when you hear freelance work jobs. We also call them contract consultants, and this is someone who's hired for temporary consultations for specific issues within a company. And we also call them contract to hire. This is the really good one, a job that begins as a freelance, independent contractor position, but has the potential to become a regular employee position if things go well. And you'll see this very often with people like graphic designers. Sometimes the workload becomes so intense that they need to actually hire some permanent employees out of their freelance group. Or they're particularly impressed with your freelance work and like, hey, we need to bring this person on full time because we don't want to lose them to maybe another company that might try to grab them and grab their time and talents. So you'll see that as well. These are the most common freelance industries as of 2018. So computer and information technology, especially things like desktop support, accounting and finance, human resources and recruiting. There's a sociology criminology industry right there. Editing, proofreading, and writing. We will talk about this again as grant writers. That's later on in module 6 or 7, I believe. We're doing grant writing. So you can actually be a freelance grant writer and write yourself a salary in the grant project that you may be the project manager over, or you may run. Kind of interesting to write your own salary. Administrative work is often a freelance position. We call those temp jobs or kind of office clerical jobs. Project management, data entry, being an analyst, especially if it's for a short-term program or project. This can be in government as well. Software development, and that's kind of software to software. Maybe they're doing software development just for 1 to 2 years, and after they've released that version, then they're going to hire a whole bunch of freelancers to work on version 2. Technical support, customer service. So these are areas that you're going to find freelance work. You also see freelance work in construction as well, which is not on the list, but those are the main ones. The pros of freelancing: having control over your workload, the clients you work with, and your income is a big benefit of freelancing. So you can kind of determine what you make and when you work and so forth. So if you really like the flexibility and the variety, then freelancing is a great fit for you. When you freelance, you're in the driver's seat. You determine what jobs to take on, which clients you want to work for, and your pay rate. Depending on your level of expertise, it could be possible to work part-time hours and make full-time pay. This can happen for people that do tutor work as well, right? That they're a freelance contractor. You get flexibility and remote work, also a perk, especially in times where you can't be together physically due to travel or other geographical constraints. Most of the time, working on freelance projects will involve working at your home office and working the hours you so choose, or maybe at a specific job site. You'll absolutely have deadlines to meet, but you get to decide kind of when and where you work. So if you want to be your own boss, that's a really great advantage to freelancing. The cons of freelancing. So yes, what comes up must go down. With the ultimate in control comes those additional responsibilities, right? So as a freelancer, you're the business owner. You need to stay on top of taxes, invoices, payments received, finding your own health insurance, buying every piece of software and technology you need to complete your work. You may need to buy yourself hardware or tools or equipment in order to do it, and that can be very expensive. We also have what we call the feast or famine syndrome. Another real downside to freelancing: some months you'll be able to be full to the brim with work, while the next month may be a ghost town. There's just not a job in sight. You may be relying on a consistent contract with one client, only to find that all of a sudden they don't need you anymore. So it can be very come and go type work. So some people take the opportunity to invest and save while they're actively working to prepare for those times where there might not be a lot of work available. Freelancing requires good money management and constant sourcing of new clients. So you got to kind of be willing to fish for jobs, even while you're working full time, to kind of be looking toward the future to prevent the famine. Okay. Just again, to round out freelancing, these are the traits you would need to be a good freelancer. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the personality stuff we've already talked about. So some people are better at this than others. And now that you know yourself better than ever before, you should be able to get a sense of this, if this is for you. So first, discipline. With no boss watching, only you can prevent procrastination, right? So you have to be really on top of yourself and admit if you can't stay on task. Persistence, especially when you're getting started and desperately trying to track down work. You're going to get a lot of no's, and you have to just keep going every day and let it roll off your back. You have to be resilient. Rejection happens a lot. You have to move on. And not take it personally if somebody doesn't think you're talented enough to do the work. You're going to find somebody else that thinks you are the right fit. Organizational skills, tracking expenses, reimbursements, hours, deadlines, and streamlining your work so that you don't go crazy keeping track of all that. You need to be very assertive. If you want to survive and grow your business as a contractor, you have to be comfortable approaching strangers and networking in person and digitally with people you've never met. So if you don't enjoy doing that, then this might be hard for you. Communicative. Be willing to have the hard conversations, like negotiating salary and deadlines, or maybe even leaving a client. Like, hey, this isn't working out between us. There's some problems and I don't think we can overcome them. So it's time to terminate the relationship and terminate the work contract. And I say handle with care because you always want to leave that bridge intact. You've heard the expression, don't burn your bridges, because you might need to backtrack. So always handle it tactfully, professionally, because here's the other thing. You might need to reference a past client or a past organization that you worked for to get a future job. So you always want to end the relationship as professionally as you can. Even if the relationship didn't go the way you wanted it to, it's a organization can still give you a glowing review and just say, hey, you know what? Our deadlines changed. We were really sad to lose this person as a contractor, but unfortunately the project just took on some new deadlines of its own, and that didn't meet the calendar and the timeline of our person. But they had the talent, they had the skills to do it, and we were really sorry to lose them. That's very justifiable to a future employer, right? Or you can say, hey, so again, look at the relationship. They might be a good reference for you because maybe there are things out of your control, or maybe they said, hey, you know what? Our organization ran out of money. This was a funded project from another organization, and our budget just went haywire. We had all kinds of unexpected things happen, which was totally out of the control of employee X. Otherwise, their work was satisfactory or excellent, and they would be a great asset to your organization. But unfortunately, our organization just ran out of money and we couldn't pay them anymore. Again, stuff out of your control that is reasonable for another employer to hear, that also reaffirms that you have the skills that one's looking for, but unfortunately had some bad luck, right? So again, I just felt like it was important to go through the ins and outs of freelancing because there's a way to cover it on your resume. There is a strategy to use if you're seeking it, and a way to determine if it's for you. All right, so we'll end this section with resumes and cover letters and move on to the next part.